I'm Jessica, 29, and I still remember the exact moment my mother called my wedding an embarrassment to the Montgomery name. Her words cut through me like shattered glass as I stood in our family kitchen, engagement ring glittering mockingly on my finger. My crime? Loving Tyler, a craftsman from the wrong side of town. My parents had spent months trying to sabotage our wedding, but they never anticipated my response. They thought I'd cave under pressure, abandon the love of my life to preserve their precious social standing. They had no idea what I was planning. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family pressure for someone you love. Growing up as a Montgomery meant navigating a world where appearance always trumped authenticity. My father, William, built his reputation as one of the city's most respected surgeons. His position on the hospital board gave him significant influence in our community, something he never let anyone forget. My mother, Sophia, complemented his professional status with her carefully cultivated social presence. She chaired 3 different charity committees, not because she cared deeply about the causes, but because they were the right organizations to be associated with. Our family legacy stretched back 4 generations in the city, with old money and older connections. The Montgomery name opened doors, secured reservations at exclusive restaurants, and guaranteed invitations to the events that mattered. It also came with suffocating expectations that I felt crushing me from my earliest memories. Our Sunday family dinners were performances rather than gatherings. We'd sit around the imposing mahogany dining table, using the proper forks, maintaining perfect posture, and discussing only appropriate topics. My father would interrogate us about our weekly achievements while my mother scrutinized everything from our table manners to our clothing choices. These dinners weren't about connection, they were about reinforcement of the Montgomery standard. Jessica, sit up straight. No one respects a woman who slouches, my mother would say, reaching across to physically adjust my shoulders while offering a tight smile that never reached her eyes. From kindergarten through high school, I brought home excellent grades, participated in the right extracurricular activities, and maintained the friendships my parents approved of. Yet somehow, it was never enough. When I earned straight A's, my father would ask why I hadn't secured additional extra credit. When I was selected for the debate team, my mother wondered why I hadn't been chosen as team captain. My genuine passion for art and design was dismissed as a lovely hobby, but nothing more. When my high school art teacher suggested I apply to prestigious design programs, my mother laughed it off during a parent-teacher conference. The Montgomerys aren't artists, Mrs. Keller. We're doctors, lawyers, and business leaders. Jessica will pursue something practical. And so I did, dutifully enrolling in the business program my parents selected, setting aside my sketchbooks and design portfolios. I excelled academically but felt increasingly hollow inside, watching my true interests wither from neglect. The comparison to other families' children was constant and deliberate. Did you hear that the Harrington girl was accepted to Yale? Early decision, of course. Or, the Nelson boy just landed an internship at Goldman Sachs. His father says he's already being groomed for management. These comments always came with pointed looks in my direction, silent assessments of how I measured up against these paragons of achievement. The emotional toll was immense but invisible to anyone outside our family. In public, we were the picture-perfect Montgomerys. In private, I experienced love that felt entirely conditional, based on achievements rather than who I was as a person. My brother Alexander had seemingly found the perfect solution: total compliance. 3 years older than me, he followed our father into medicine, attending his alma mater and specializing in cardiology. He married Natalie, a dermatologist from another suitable family, in a wedding that my mother still referenced as absolute perfection. From the outside, Alexander appeared to be living the Montgomery dream. Only I knew about his private struggles, the panic attacks before major exams, the prescription medications he relied on to manage his anxiety, the occasional wistful comments about how he'd once wanted to explore emergency medicine in underserved communities rather than the lucrative private practice our father had mapped out for him. We were both trapped in different ways, but Alexander had chosen to surrender completely while I continued to resist. My rebellion began small but grew more significant over time. After college, instead of accepting the corporate job my father had arranged, I took a position at a small marketing firm that allowed me to incorporate some design work. I moved from our affluent neighborhood to a more diverse part of the city, claiming it was to save money but really seeking distance from my parents' constant surveillance. Over the next few years, I gradually built a circle of friends who knew nothing about the Montgomery name or legacy. These were people who valued creativity, authenticity, and genuine connection. With their encouragement, I started a small design consulting business on the side, working evenings and weekends to build a portfolio that reflected my true interests. The physical distance from my family home gave me room to breathe, to discover who Jessica Montgomery might be if she weren't constantly performing for parental approval. Each small decision I made independently, from the color I painted my apartment walls to the clients I chose to work with, felt like a tiny liberation. I was slowly constructing an identity separate from the Montgomery blueprint, though I hadn't yet found the courage to break away completely. I met Tyler Jackson on a rainy Saturday morning at a community center in the Arts District. I'd volunteered to help design promotional materials for a neighborhood revitalization project, and Tyler was there to discuss building custom benches and planters for the new community garden. He walked in wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with small scars and calluses that spoke of genuine craftsmanship. When he presented his ideas to the committee, I was struck by his passion and unpretentious expertise. Unlike the polished, rehearsed presentations I was accustomed to in my family circle, Tyler spoke with authentic enthusiasm about sustainable materials and functional design. His hands moved expressively as he described his vision, occasionally running through his slightly too long brown hair when he got particularly excited about a detail. After the meeting, we ended up next to each other at the refreshment table, both reaching for the last chocolate chip cookie. Our eyes met, and he broke into a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You should take it," he said, pushing the cookie toward me. "I've already had 3. The artistic spirit requires fuel, right?" I laughed, surprised by his easy warmth. "How do you know I'm artistic?" "I watched you sketching during the meeting. Your designs for the promotional posters looked amazing." "I'm Tyler, by the way." "Tyler Jackson." "Jessica Montgomery," I replied, instinctively leaving off my last name as I often did in new social situations, trying to avoid the recognition it sometimes brought. We ended up talking for over an hour, long after the committee meeting had dispersed. I learned that Tyler had grown up in the working-class neighborhood just beyond the Arts District, raised primarily by his mother who worked as a nurse's aide at a retirement home while cleaning houses on weekends to make ends meet. Despite limited resources, she had encouraged Tyler's interest in woodworking from an early age, scraping together money for tools when she could. After high school, Tyler had apprenticed with a master furniture maker rather than attending college, learning traditional techniques while developing his own distinctive style. Now, at 32, he owned a small but growing business creating custom furniture and installations from a converted warehouse workshop. I found myself hesitating to share details about my own background, conscious of the vast differences in our upbringings and acutely aware of how my parents would view someone like Tyler. Yet something about his genuine interest and lack of pretension made me feel safe enough to gradually open up about my passion for design and my struggles to pursue it against my family's expectations. "Sounds like your parents confuse you with a trophy they want to display," he observed, without judgment but with surprising insight. No one in my social circle had ever been so direct about my family dynamics. Our connection deepened over the following weeks as we collaborated on the community project. Tyler invited me to his workshop, a cavernous space filled with the comforting smell of sawdust and linseed oil. Watching him work was mesmerizing. His strong hands transformed raw wood into functional art with practiced precision. He showed equal interest in my design process, asking thoughtful questions and offering genuine appreciation for my creative decisions. Tyler's world was refreshingly different from everything I'd known. His friends included electricians, teachers, bartenders, and social workers, people who measured success by fulfillment rather than status. When we gathered at his favorite neighborhood pub, Conversations flowed freely without the constant undercurrent of competition and judgment I'd grown up with. No one cared what university anyone had attended or what neighborhood they lived in. They cared about authenticity, loyalty, and showing up for each other. Our relationship grew naturally, without the strategic calculation that characterized most relationships in my family's social circle. Tyler never checked my family connections or evaluated my career trajectory before deciding his feelings. He simply appreciated me for who I was in the moment, encouraging my creative pursuits with unqualified support. "You have a unique eye," he told me one evening as we looked through my portfolio. "You should be doing this full-time, not just as a side hustle." When I explained my parents' disapproval of creative careers, Tyler didn't dismiss my concerns but helped me see the manipulation behind their expectations. "They've convinced you that their approval is necessary for your happiness," he observed. "What if it isn't?" Our romantic relationship evolved alongside a creative partnership. We collaborated on several projects, combining his craftsmanship with my design sensibility. Weekend trips to small towns within driving distance became our escape, where we'd explore antique shops and local artisan markets, drawing inspiration and building shared memories away from my family's watchful eyes. 6 months into our relationship, Tyler invited me to his workshop after hours. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous as he led me to a workbench covered with a cloth. When he pulled it away, I gasped at the sight of a delicate jewelry box crafted from maple with inlaid cherry wood in a pattern that echoed a design from one of my sketchbooks. "Open it," he urged softly. Inside, nestled on a cushion of blue velvet, lay a ring unlike any I'd seen in the display cases of the high-end jewelers my mother frequented. The band was hand-forged silver with a subtle wood inlay, supporting not a traditional diamond but a luminous moonstone surrounded by tiny sapphires. "I designed it thinking about that night we stayed up talking on the rooftop," Tyler explained, his voice slightly unsteady. "You said moonlight was more honest than sunlight because it doesn't hide the shadows, just transforms them into something beautiful. That's what you've done for me, Jessica. And if you're willing, I want to spend my life trying to do the same for you." I said yes without hesitation, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of a proposal so perfectly aligned with who we were together. We celebrated that night with a bottle of champagne on the same rooftop, making plans and dreaming of a future that felt entirely our own. The euphoria carried us through the weekend, but by Sunday evening, reality began to intrude. I couldn't postpone telling my family indefinitely, and Tyler deserved better than to be treated as a secret shame. We agreed to announce our engagement at the next Montgomery family dinner, though neither of us harbored illusions about the reception we'd receive. That dinner remains etched in my memory as one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. My mother's smile froze when Tyler introduced himself, her eyes performing a rapid assessment of his clothing, well-made but not designer, his hands, strong and slightly rough from his work, and his overall appearance, handsome but lacking the polished sheen of the men in their circle. My father engaged Tyler in what appeared to be friendly conversation but was actually a thinly disguised interrogation about his background, education, and business. Tyler answered with straightforward dignity, neither apologizing for his lack of college degree nor exaggerating his modest business success. Throughout the meal, my parents exchanged meaningful glances while my brother Alexander attempted to diffuse tension with neutral topics. My mother managed to work in several anecdotes about family friends whose daughters had married so well, code for wealthy men from appropriate backgrounds. By dessert, we still hadn't found the right moment to announce our engagement. When Tyler excused himself to use the restroom, my mother leaned across the table and whispered urgently, "Jessica, he seems nice enough for a tradesman, but surely this isn't serious? You can't possibly be considering." The return of Tyler interrupted her, and I impulsively reached for his hand as he sat down. "Actually, Mother, Father, we have some news. Tyler and I are engaged." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. My father's face hardened while my mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace as if seeking reassurance that her world hadn't completely collapsed. "This is very sudden," my father finally said, his clinical tone suggesting he was diagnosing a concerning condition rather than responding to happy news. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of strained congratulations and thinly veiled concerns about rushing into things. As we drove home, I apologized repeatedly to Tyler for my parents' behavior. "Hey," he said, taking my hand across the console. "I knew what we were walking into. Your parents' approval isn't what matters to me. You are." His unwavering support strengthened my resolve, but I couldn't shake the knowledge that this uncomfortable dinner was just the opening skirmish in what promised to be a prolonged battle. Despite the disastrous family dinner, I held on to a sliver of hope that my parents might come around once they got to know Tyler better. With that optimistic delusion guiding me, I arranged for a formal engagement announcement dinner at Castellano's, an upscale restaurant neutral enough to satisfy my parents' standards while still being a place where Tyler and I felt comfortable. I spent hours preparing for that evening, selecting a dress that would meet my mother's approval, rehearsing how we would present our plans, even coaching Tyler on certain topics to emphasize or avoid with my father. The weight of anxiety pressed on my chest as we waited in the restaurant's elegant bar area for my parents to arrive. "You look beautiful," Tyler whispered, squeezing my hand. "And terrified. Remember, we're celebrating our engagement, not facing a firing squad." I attempted a smile just as my parents walked in, my mother resplendent in a designer dress and my father imposing in his tailored suit. Alexander and Natalie followed, providing what I hoped would be a moderating influence. The initial exchanges were painfully polite, everyone performing their roles with practiced precision. When the appetizers arrived, I took a deep breath and placed my left hand deliberately on the table, the moonstone ring catching the light. "We wanted to formally announce our engagement and share some of our initial thoughts about the wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother's eyes fixated on the ring, her expression shifting from polite interest to poorly concealed horror. "That's quite an unusual choice for an engagement ring," she observed, each word precisely measured. "Tyler designed it himself," I replied, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. "The moonstone has special significance for us." "How creative," she responded with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though of course, you'll want something more traditional for daily wear in professional settings." Tyler maintained his composure as we outlined our tentative plans for a spring wedding the following year. My parents responded with noncommittal murmurs and occasional clarifying questions that seemed designed to highlight potential problems rather than offer support. As dessert was served, my father cleared his throat and adopted what I recognized as his reasonable professional tone, the one he used when delivering unwelcome news to patients. "Jessica, Tyler, while we appreciate you sharing your plans, your mother and I feel this entire situation requires further consideration. Marriage is a serious commitment, not a creative collaboration or a statement against convention." The drive home from the restaurant was silent, the weight of my parents' disapproval filling the car. The real explosion came the following evening when my father called and asked to meet with Tyler privately man to man. Against my better judgment, Tyler agreed, wanting to make every effort for my sake. He returned from that meeting white-faced with anger. My father had offered him $50,000 to break off our engagement, suggesting that a man in Tyler's financial position would surely see the practical value of such an arrangement. The assumption that Tyler could be bought, that his love for me had a price tag, revealed the depth of my parents' disdain. When confronted about this bribe, my father was unapologetic. "I'm protecting this family from an obvious mistake," he declared. "This boy is clearly interested in the Montgomery connections and resources. What could he possibly offer you in return?" My mother's approach was more emotional but equally manipulative. She called daily, alternating between tearful pleas about family embarrassment and sharp reminders of how this unfortunate choice would affect my future. "Do you have any idea how people are already talking?" she demanded during one particularly difficult call. "Caroline Winthrop asked me if it was true you were marrying some carpenter, as if I'd announced you were joining the circus. Is that what you want? To turn our family into a source of gossip and ridicule?" The pressure escalated as my parents mobilized their social network against us. Family friends called with concerns and thinly disguised lectures about suitable partnerships. My mother's bridge club members sent articles about failed marriages across class boundaries. My father's colleagues suddenly had nephews and sons who were perfect for someone like Jessica and available for convenient introductions. Alexander maintained public neutrality but called me privately to offer support. They did the same thing with Natalie until they realized her family's medical connections were useful, he admitted. It was just less obvious because she already fit their basic requirements. Stay strong if Tyler is what you really want. The constant barrage took its toll on my emotional well-being. I developed insomnia, spending nights staring at the ceiling and questioning every aspect of our relationship. Not because I doubted Tyler, but because years of conditioning had taught me to seek my parents' approval for validation. During one particularly low moment, Tyler found me crying on our apartment balcony at 3 a.m. Instead of offering empty reassurances, he sat beside me in silence for a long while before speaking. I love you, Jessica. That's not going to change whether your parents approve or not. But I need to know if you can be happy without their blessing, because I don't think it's coming anytime soon. His question forced me to confront the pattern that had defined my entire life, performing for parental approval that was always just out of reach. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, gradually recognizing how deeply my parents' conditional love had shaped my sense of self-worth. 3 months into our engagement, my parents escalated to financial pressure. My father called me to his study during a rare visit home, explaining in his methodical way that while he respected my independence, certain family financial supports would need to be reconsidered if I continued on this problematic path. These supports included my health insurance through his practice, the partial rent subsidy they'd provided since college, which I hadn't realized was a control mechanism until that moment, and my expected inheritance. He presented these not as threats but as natural consequences of my choices. What my father didn't anticipate was my reaction. Instead of the panic or capitulation he expected, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The prospect of complete financial separation meant freedom from the invisible strings that had always accompanied their support. I understand, I said calmly, watching confusion flicker across his face. Tyler and I will manage on our own. In fact, it's probably overdue. My unexpected response created the first crack in my parents' unified front. They had assumed their financial leverage would force compliance, as it had throughout my life. My willingness to surrender these benefits rather than my relationship disturbed their certainty and suggested they might have miscalculated. When my parents realized their initial tactics hadn't broken our engagement, they shifted strategies. If they couldn't prevent the wedding, they would control it completely, transforming it from a potential embarrassment into a showcase of Montgomery prestige that coincidentally happened to include Tyler. Darling, we've been thinking, my mother announced during an unexpected visit to my apartment. Your father and I want to support your happiness. Let's put the past few months behind us and focus on creating a beautiful wedding. This apparent olive branch came with strings attached to every aspect of the celebration. My mother immediately assembled a planning binder filled with options that aligned with her vision, an extravagant society wedding that would impress their circle while minimizing Tyler's influence and background. The venue options she presented were limited to the country club where my parents were founding members, the botanical garden where she sat on the board, or the grand ballroom at the Regency Hotel. When Tyler and I tentatively suggested his beautifully renovated warehouse with its exposed brick and industrial charm, my mother laughed as if we'd made an excellent joke. Oh, Jessica, be serious. We couldn't possibly ask Judge Harrington and Dr. Whitfield to attend a wedding in a warehouse. People of a certain standing have expectations. Every vendor meeting became a battleground of passive-aggressive control. When we met with caterers, my mother dismissed our preference for family-style service featuring local ingredients. The Montgomerys have always had proper plated service with French cuisine, she insisted. Your cousin Abigail's wedding set the standard with that lovely 5-course meal. We should consult with Chef Marcel again. Tyler attempted compromise, suggesting we incorporate elements important to both families. My mom makes an amazing peach cobbler from my grandmother's recipe. Maybe we could include that alongside the more formal desserts? My mother's smile tightened. That's a lovely thought for a family dinner, but wedding desserts are a statement. We'll have the traditional tiered cake from Ellison's Bakery, as we always do. The venue situation came to a head when Tyler and I secretly booked his warehouse space for our preferred date, placing a deposit before telling my parents. We'd spent weeks renovating the space together on evenings and weekends, installing proper restrooms, updating the electrical system, and transforming the upper loft into a perfect ceremony space with dramatic city views. When we finally revealed our choice, presenting it as a fait accompli with photos of the transformed space, my mother was suspiciously quiet. 3 days later, we received a devastating call from our warehouse contact. "I'm really sorry, but there's been a mix-up with the booking system," he explained uncomfortably. "It turns out the venue was already reserved for a corporate event on your date. We'll have to refund your deposit." It took less than a day of investigation to discover the truth. My father had reached out to the building's owner, a former patient, and offered to book the entire venue for a significantly inflated price for a hospital fundraiser on our wedding date. When confronted, my parents didn't even deny the sabotage. "We're saving you from yourselves," my father said calmly. That venue was completely unsuitable. The country club has already reserved our date, and they're excited to host another Montgomery celebration. The guest list became another contentious battlefield. My parents presented us with a spreadsheet containing over 250 names, hospital board members, country club associates, clients from my father's practice, and various social connections important to maintaining the Montgomery standing. Tyler's side, meanwhile, was limited to immediate family and a handful of presentable friends who passed my mother's subtle vetting. "Do we really need to include your high school woodshop teacher?" my mother asked with raised eyebrows when reviewing Tyler's modest list. "And these friends from your neighborhood? Do they understand the formality of the occasion?" "They're the people who supported me when I had nothing," Tyler responded with quiet dignity. "They taught me my craft and believed in me. Yes, they absolutely need to be there." The spreadsheet wars escalated, with names mysteriously disappearing from Tyler's list while my parents' social obligations multiplied. Invitations became another flashpoint, my mother insisting on formal engraved stationery with the Montgomery crest, while we preferred handcrafted papers created by Tyler's artist friend. The situation reached a breaking point during what should have been a simple cake tasting at an upscale bakery. My mother arrived having already consumed several glasses of champagne at lunch, her usual perfect composure slightly frayed. Tyler's mother Janet had joined us, excited to be included in the planning process. A retired nurse's aide, she had dressed carefully for the occasion in her best floral dress and costume jewelry. As we sampled different cake options, my mother became increasingly critical, making dismissive comments about simpler palettes when Janet expressed preference for a classic vanilla bean cake over the bakery's signature champagne and elderflower creation. "Perhaps we should have a separate sheet cake in the kitchen for guests who prefer basic flavors," my mother suggested with a condescending smile. Janet, who had endured numerous subtle digs with grace, finally responded, "I may have a simple palate, Mrs. Montgomery, but I raised a son who knows the difference between genuine class and putting on airs." My mother's face flushed deep red. "Well, I raised a daughter who until recently understood her family's standards and expectations. Now she's throwing away every advantage we've given her on some romantic notion of marrying a handyman. Do you have any idea how mortifying this is for our family? This entire wedding is becoming an embarrassment to the Montgomery name." The bakery fell silent, other customers and staff frozen in awkward witness to my mother's outburst. Tyler immediately stood and helped his mother gather her purse and jacket, his face tight with controlled anger. "We're done here," he said quietly to me. "No cake is worth this kind of disrespect." That evening, after ensuring his mother was okay, Tyler and I had the most serious conversation of our relationship. Sitting on the floor of our apartment with takeout containers between us, we confronted the reality of our situation. "We have options," Tyler said, methodically laying them out. "We can elope and avoid this circus entirely. We can continue fighting for the wedding we want, knowing it will mean ongoing conflict. Or we can surrender to your parents' version and focus on building our life together afterward. I stared at the ring on my finger, the moonstone catching the light as I turned my hand. There's a fourth option, I said slowly, an idea taking shape that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. What if we make them think they've won, while actually creating exactly the celebration we want? Tyler looked skeptical. You mean deceive your parents? That doesn't sound like you, Jess. Neither does letting them steamroll the most important day of our lives, I countered. Besides, this isn't just about our wedding anymore. It's about setting the pattern for our entire marriage. If we don't stand up to them now, they'll expect this level of control forever. We talked late into the night, weighing ethical considerations against practical realities. The seed of an idea grew into a tentative plan, one that would require careful execution and the support of trusted friends, but might allow us to break the cycle of control while still leaving room for eventual reconciliation. Tyler was supportive but concerned. I just want to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. Revenge isn't a great foundation for starting our marriage. It's not about revenge, I assured him, though I recognized a small part of me did want my parents to experience the consequences of their actions. It's about claiming our right to make our own choices, even when they disapprove. It's about starting our marriage on our terms, not theirs. As we finally went to bed in the early hours of the morning, I felt both apprehension and excitement about the path ahead. For the first time in my life, I was prepared to stop seeking my parents' approval and instead demand their respect, even if that meant employing tactics they themselves had taught me about strategic maneuvering. The day after my mother's cake-tasting meltdown, I called an emergency meeting with our closest friends. We gathered in the back room of Tyler's workshop, seated on half-finished furniture pieces and makeshift benches. I explained the situation in detail, including my parents' pattern of manipulation and our growing realization that traditional resistance wasn't working. We need a different approach, I concluded. Something that allows us to have the wedding we actually want while breaking this cycle of control permanently. My best friend Zoe, who had witnessed my family dynamics for years, was the first to speak. So basically, you want to make your parents think they're getting their way, while secretly planning the real wedding elsewhere? Tyler nodded. That's the general idea, but we need to figure out if it's even possible to pull off, and if we can do it in a way that feels authentic to who we are rather than just spiteful. For hours, we brainstormed possibilities, mapping out potential scenarios on Tyler's workshop chalkboard. Our discussion centered around key principles. The plan needed to allow us to have a meaningful ceremony that reflected our values. It had to effectively demonstrate to my parents that their controlling behavior would no longer work, and it needed to leave open the possibility of eventual reconciliation rather than permanent estrangement. What if, suggested Miguel, Tyler's childhood friend who now worked as an event coordinator, we let your parents believe they're planning the country club wedding while we create the real celebration at the warehouse? We could even schedule them for the same day. The idea resonated immediately. We could pretend to surrender to my parents' vision, going through the motions of planning their version of the wedding while secretly creating our authentic celebration. The country club would host an empty ceremony while our actual friends and loved ones gathered at the warehouse. As the concept developed, we identified key elements that would make the plan work. We would need absolute information control, with only our most trusted circle knowing the truth. We would need a convincing performance of compliance to lull my parents into security. We would need parallel vendors who could be trusted to maintain confidentiality. And most importantly, we would need a way to reveal the truth that would make our point without being needlessly cruel. The goal isn't to humiliate them, I emphasized. It's to show them that their manipulation tactics no longer work, and to establish boundaries that will define our relationship going forward. By midnight, fueled by pizza and determination, we had outlined a comprehensive strategy with contingency plans for various scenarios. Each friend took responsibility for different aspects. Miguel would handle the real venue and catering coordination, Zoe would manage communication with the authentic vendors, Tyler's workshop crew would handle the transformation of the warehouse space, and my colleague Danny, who had experience in event planning, would help me maintain the illusion of cooperation with my parents. The most challenging question was how to handle the actual moment of revelation. After much debate, we decided that a personal message delivered just as the country club ceremony was supposed to begin would be most effective. Not a public humiliation, but a private reckoning that would force my parents to confront their behavior. With the framework established, I began the performance of my lifetime the very next day. I called my mother with a carefully rehearsed speech about re-evaluating priorities and understanding family traditions. I suggested we start fresh with wedding planning, deferring to her experience in these matters. Her triumphant tone was barely concealed. "I'm so glad you've come to your senses, darling. I was just telling your father that you'd eventually see reason. The country club is still available for June 12th, and I've already spoken with Reverend Phillips about officiating." Over the next few weeks, I played my part with Oscar-worthy dedication. I attended dress fittings at the boutiques my mother selected, making appropriate appreciative noises about gowns I had no intention of wearing. I nodded enthusiastically during appointments with florists, photographers, and caterers who would never actually document our wedding. I accepted sample invitations with the Montgomery crest embossed in gold, knowing they would never be mailed. The emotional toll of this deception was considerable. There were moments when the constant lying made me physically ill, forcing me to question whether the end justified the means. During one particularly difficult evening, after spending hours with my mother and her event planner reviewing table settings, I broke down in tears in our apartment bathroom. Tyler found me there, sitting on the edge of the bathtub trying to muffle my sobs. "We can still call this off," he said gently, sitting beside me. "We can elope tomorrow and be done with all of it." I shook my head, wiping away tears. That would be easier, but it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. They would see it as another rebellion to be managed, not a fundamental change in our relationship. To ground ourselves amidst the deception, Tyler and I created private rituals of recommitment. Each Sunday evening, we would turn off our phones, light candles in our apartment, and write our evolving wedding vows together. These intimate moments reminded us of the authentic commitment at the center of all the complicated maneuvering. Meanwhile, our real wedding took shape in secret. Late at night, after my parents believed I was home resting, I would meet with our actual vendors in Tyler's workshop. We selected locally sourced catering that reflected both our tastes. We commissioned handmade invitations from an artist friend, sending them with strict confidentiality notes to our genuine guest list. Tyler and his crew worked weekends transforming the warehouse, building a custom altar from reclaimed wood and designing lighting that would showcase the space's industrial beauty. I found my actual wedding dress at a vintage boutique, a 1930s-inspired silk gown with delicate beading that cost a fraction of the designer monstrosities my mother preferred. A local seamstress modified it to fit perfectly, adding personal touches that reflected my design aesthetic. Several close calls nearly exposed our plan. One afternoon, my mother dropped by our apartment unannounced while Miguel was reviewing warehouse layout plans on our dining table. I barely managed to sweep the drawings into a drawer before letting her in, inventing a headache to explain my flustered appearance. Another time, we ran into my father's colleague at a meeting with our real photographer. I introduced Tyler as a client interested in architectural photography, holding my breath until the man moved on with just a curious glance. The most significant threat came from an unexpected quarter. Alexander stopped by the warehouse during a major work session, having tracked my phone location out of concern when I missed our usual Sunday call. Confronted with the evidence of our parallel planning, dozens of friends installing lighting, arranging furniture, and hanging decorations, he stood in shocked silence. "So this is why you've suddenly become Mother's perfect, compliant daughter," he said finally. "You're planning to humiliate them." "Not humiliate," I corrected. "Wake them up. Make them see that they can't control me through manipulation anymore." Alexander walked the space slowly, taking in the obvious care and meaning in every detail. "They'll never forgive you for this," he warned. "Maybe not immediately," I acknowledged. "But I'm hoping that eventually, they'll understand it was necessary." "The question is, are you going to tell them?" My brother considered for a long moment before a slow smile spread across his face. Actually, I think I want to help. Someone needs to make sure they actually show up to receive your message, right? His unexpected allyship strengthened our resolve and added a crucial element to our plan. Alexander would ensure our parents were in position at the country club when the revelation occurred, preventing any last-minute changes that might derail the carefully orchestrated moment. As the weeks passed, I maintained a detailed journal of the planning process, recording both the emotional journey and practical details. This wasn't just documentation. It was a way to process my conflicted feelings about the deception and clarify my intentions. I needed to ensure this plan remained about establishing healthy boundaries rather than devolving into petty revenge. With 2 weeks remaining before the wedding date, we faced a near disaster when my mother accidentally saw a notification from our real florist on my phone. I managed to convince her it was for a client project, but the close call prompted additional security measures. We created a separate email account for wedding communications and I purchased a second phone dedicated exclusively to real wedding coordination. The psychological strain of living this double life was immense, but it was countered by the growing excitement as our authentic celebration took form. Each time I walked into the transformed warehouse space, witnessing the physical manifestation of our vision coming to life, I felt more confident in our decision. This wasn't just about defying my parents. It was about claiming the right to define our own celebration and, by extension, our life together. As our wedding date approached, the performance intensified. I attended every tasting, fitting, and planning session at the country club with manufactured enthusiasm, taking detailed notes and offering thoughtful feedback on options I knew would never materialize. The periwinkle napkins complement the centerpieces beautifully, I would observe, watching my mother's satisfied smile at my apparent surrender to her taste. And I think you're right about the string quartet for the cocktail hour, it's so much more elegant than the jazz band I originally wanted. My mother blossomed under the impression that she had successfully molded me back into the compliant daughter she'd always wanted. She began calling her friends daily with updates on wedding details, each conversation a victory lap celebrating her perceived triumph. The Callahan wedding will seem positively quaint by comparison, I overheard her telling her bridge club president. We've secured Judge Harrington's private garden for the rehearsal dinner. So exclusive, they've never opened it for a non-family event before. She took particular pleasure in escorting me to final fittings for a designer wedding gown I privately called the Cupcake, a massive confection of tulle and crystals that represented everything I disliked about traditional bridal fashion. Standing on the boutique pedestal surrounded by mirrors, wearing a dress that made me feel like a stranger to myself, I maintained my facade by dabbing at fake tears. It's just so perfect, I whispered, watching my mother's eyes well up with genuine emotion. You'll be the most beautiful bride Riverdale Country Club has ever seen, she assured me, adjusting the massive veil with proprietary satisfaction. My father's approach to wedding control was more practical, focusing on financial oversight and strategic connections. He insisted on paying vendors directly rather than providing us with funds, ensuring every selection met his standards. I've taken the liberty of upgrading the photography package, he informed us during one planning meeting. The basic option you selected wouldn't provide sufficient coverage for an event of this magnitude. His conversations with Tyler took on a superficially friendly but fundamentally condescending tone, centered around financial guidance and career advice. Over cigars on the country club terrace, a setting deliberately chosen to emphasize Tyler's outsider status, my father outlined his vision for our future. Once you're officially part of the family, we should discuss your business plan, he suggested with the air of someone conferring an enormous favor. I know several investors who might consider backing an expansion of your operation, provided you focus on more upscale markets. Tyler maintained remarkable composure during these interactions, neither openly defiant nor falsely obsequious. He would nod thoughtfully at my father's suggestions while offering non-committal responses that preserved his dignity without exposing our plan. I appreciate the thought, he would say. I'm certainly open to exploring new directions after the wedding. The real test of our acting abilities came with the creation and distribution of save the dates for the country club wedding. My mother insisted on a professional photo shoot at the venue, positioning us on the grand staircase and manicured gardens to create the perfect announcement image. The Andersons' daughter had her bridal photos taken in the exact same spot, she commented as the photographer adjusted our pose. But yours will be so much more elegant. Watching these announcements go out to hundreds of my parents' associates, people who would show up to an empty ceremony, triggered moments of doubt about the potential public embarrassment. We carefully adjusted our plan to minimize collateral damage, creating a private notification that would be sent to the country club guests explaining the situation and providing the real venue address for those who genuinely wished to celebrate with us. The fake rehearsal dinner represented the pinnacle of our charade. Held at my parents' country club 2 nights before the wedding, it brought together family members and the wedding party for what everyone except our inner circle believed was a genuine preparation for the upcoming ceremony. My father stood to deliver a toast that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the man I was marrying. When Jessica first introduced Tyler, "I'll admit I had my reservations," he began, glass raised. "But I've come to appreciate his willingness to embrace the opportunities this family can provide. I'm confident that with proper guidance, he'll develop into a suitable husband for a Montgomery." Tyler's response toast was a masterpiece of strategic ambiguity. "I want to thank the Montgomerys for welcoming me into their world," he said, his eyes meeting mine with hidden meaning. "This wedding process has been educational in ways I never could have anticipated. I'm looking forward to Saturday, when Jessica and I will truly begin our life together on a foundation of complete honesty." That evening, after returning to our apartment, we held the final coordination meeting with our core team. Every detail of both the real wedding and the revelation plan was reviewed, contingencies confirmed, and responsibilities assigned. "Is everyone clear on the timeline?" Miguel asked, reviewing his detailed schedule. "The country club ceremony is supposed to start at 4 p.m. Our actual ceremony at the warehouse begins at 4:30, giving people time to transition if they choose to." Alexander confirmed his critical role. "I'll ensure Mom and Dad are in position at the country club by 3:45. The video message is queued up with the A/V team, ready to play at exactly 4:05 when everyone is seated but before the processional would begin." As our friends departed, Tyler and I shared a quiet moment on our balcony, contemplating the elaborate plan now set irrevocably in motion. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders as we looked out at the city lights. "About marrying you?" "Not one," I replied immediately. "About the way we're doing it? Sometimes I wonder if there was a simpler path we missed. But then I remember every attempt we made to compromise, every boundary they violated, every manipulation tactic they employed. And I know this is necessary, not just for our wedding, but for every boundary negotiation in our future." I slept fitfully that night, waking several times from dreams where I walked down the country club aisle only to find no one recognized me, or where I arrived at the warehouse to discover my parents had somehow found and destroyed everything. Each time, Tyler's steady breathing beside me provided reassurance that whatever happened tomorrow, we would face it together. In my journal entry that night, I wrote, "Tomorrow we either set a new foundation for my relationship with my parents, or we accept that the connection may be permanently damaged. Either way, we're choosing authenticity over appearance, substance over social standing. For the first time in my life, I'm prioritizing what I know is right over what will make my parents happy. That alone feels like victory." The morning of our wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather approved of our plan. I woke early in Zoe's apartment, where I'd spent the night in keeping with tradition, though not the tradition my parents believed we were following. By 9 a.m., the bridesmaids who knew our secret gathered to help me prepare. Rather than the formal preparation suite at the country club, we transformed Zoe's living room into a getting-ready haven filled with flowers, champagne, and meaningful mementos. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from my mother, micromanaging from afar. "The florist arrived at the club. Centerpieces are slightly off-shade. Handling it. And then, remind your bridesmaids the car service will collect them at 2:30 sharp. Montgomery weddings start precisely on time." I responded with reassuring messages while my friends helped me into my actual wedding dress, the vintage-inspired gown that made me feel beautifully, authentically myself. My hair was styled in loose waves rather than the severe updo my mother had selected, and my makeup was natural and glowing instead of the formal palette she'd insisted upon. "You look incredible," Zoe said, adjusting the delicate hairpiece we'd found at an antique market. "Like yourself, but on the best day of your life." Meanwhile, Alexander kept me updated on my parents' movements. "Mom's been at the club since 7 a.m., terrorizing the staff," he texted. "Dad's supervising parking arrangements like he's directing surgery. They're completely convinced they've orchestrated the perfect Montgomery showcase." At 1 p.m., we implemented the most critical deception. My official bridesmaids departed in the scheduled transportation to the country club, where they would appear to participate in preliminary photography and preparations. Only my maid of honor Zoe remained with me, helping coordinate the real wedding timeline. "Operation Double Wedding is in full effect," texted Miguel from the warehouse. "Venue looks amazing. Tyler's groomsmen are handling last-minute details. Caterers arrived on schedule." As the afternoon progressed, my emotional state fluctuated between excitement about our authentic celebration and anxiety about the confrontation to come. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore, it was about changing the fundamental dynamic of my relationship with my parents, with all the risk that entailed. At 3 p.m., dressed and ready, I reviewed the video message we'd prepared for my parents one final time. We'd recorded it the previous week, with both Tyler and me speaking directly to camera, explaining our decision with firm compassion rather than accusation or anger. "It's perfect," Zoe assured me after we watched it. "Clear about the boundary you're setting but not cruel. They might not appreciate it today, but someday they might understand it was necessary." By 3:30 p.m., guests began arriving at the country club, greeted by my parents who stood proudly at the entrance to the garden ceremony space. Simultaneously, our actual friends and loved ones gathered at the warehouse, where Tyler waited beneath the wooden arch he had crafted for our vows. Alexander's updates became more frequent, seating nearly complete. Parents looked triumphant. "Judge Wilson has arrived to officiate. Operation Truth is scheduled for T-30 minutes." At 3:45 p.m., Zoe and I slipped into the warehouse through a back entrance, where I took a moment to absorb the transformation. The industrial space had become magical, string lights cascaded from exposed beams, wildflower arrangements softened the brick walls, and handcrafted wooden chairs formed an intimate semicircle around the ceremony area. Most importantly, the space was filled with people who truly knew and supported us, their faces reflecting genuine excitement rather than social obligation. Tyler spotted me from across the room, his eyes widening appreciatively at my appearance. Breaking with tradition, he crossed to me immediately, taking my hands in his. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. "For marrying you?" "Absolutely. For what comes next?" "I guess we'll find out." At precisely 4 p.m., the string quartet at the country club began playing Pachelbel's Canon, my mother's selection for the processional. Guests settled into their seats, programs in hand, expecting the conventional ceremony my parents had meticulously planned. Instead, at 4:05 p.m., the music faded and the large screens installed for the outdoor ceremony flickered to life. My face appeared, with Tyler beside me, in a setting clearly not the country club. "Hello everyone," my recorded self began. "If you're watching this, you're currently at Riverdale Country Club expecting to witness our wedding. We want to thank you for coming, but there's been a change of plans." The camera pulled back to reveal more of the warehouse space as Tyler continued, "Jessica and I are getting married today, but not here. For months, we've tried to create a wedding that honors both our relationship and Jessica's family traditions, but it became clear that wasn't possible without sacrificing our authentic selves." My image returned to center frame. "To those who know us and truly care about our happiness, we're getting married at 1450 Artisan Way in 30 minutes. You're welcome to join us for a celebration that actually reflects who we are and the life we're building together." The message concluded with practical directions and an acknowledgement that some might be confused or disappointed. "We understand this is unconventional, but so is our journey. We hope you'll understand this decision wasn't made lightly, but but with careful consideration of what will allow us to begin our marriage honestly and authentically. At the country club, Alexander later reported, the reaction was immediate and intense. My father's face flushed deep red as he immediately recognized the magnitude of what was happening. My mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her pearl necklace as she always did in moments of shock. Turn that off immediately, my father demanded of the A/V technician, who apologetically explained he couldn't. The program was set to play completely and couldn't be interrupted. As the message concluded, the assembled guests began murmuring among themselves. Some appeared genuinely amused by the unexpected development. Others seemed concerned or embarrassed on my parents' behalf. A significant number immediately checked their phones for the warehouse address, apparently intrigued by the authentic celebration we'd described. My mother attempted damage control, her voice brittle as she addressed the crowd. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. If you'll just be patient while we sort this out. But the carefully constructed facade had already crumbled. Guests began rising from their seats, some heading directly to their cars while others approached my parents with awkward expressions of sympathy or poorly concealed curiosity. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, our real ceremony began right on schedule at 4:30 p.m. Standing before our closest friends and the family members who had chosen to support our authentic relationship, Tyler and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves. No mentions of obedience or submission, but promises of partnership, growth, and mutual respect. I choose you, Jessica, Tyler said, his voice steady and sure, not as a perfect partner but as my perfect match. I promise to support your dreams as fiercely as my own, to respect your independence while celebrating our connection, and to build with you a life defined by authenticity rather than appearances. My vows acknowledged the journey that had brought us to this moment. I promise to value substance over status, to measure our success by happiness rather than approval, and to stand firmly beside you even when the path is difficult. You've helped me find the courage to be truly myself, and I will spend our life together returning that gift in every way I can. As we exchanged rings, simple bands Tyler had crafted from the same wood as our ceremony arch, I felt a profound sense of rightness that confirmed we had made the correct choice, despite the conflict it had created. Just as we were pronounced husband and wife, the warehouse doors opened to admit a stream of additional guests, people who had chosen to leave the country club and join our authentic celebration. Their presence felt like a vindication, tangible proof that not everyone valued the superficial standards my parents had tried to enforce. Our reception unfolded exactly as we had envisioned, a joyful celebration that blended elements from both our backgrounds while prioritizing genuine connection over pretense. Long farm tables encouraged conversation among diverse groups. The menu featured elegant comfort foods prepared with local ingredients. Instead of a traditional first dance to classical music, Tyler and I took the floor to an acoustic version of the song that had been playing when we first met. The atmosphere vibrated with authentic happiness that no amount of expensive planning could have manufactured. Tyler's craftsman friends mingled with my design clients. His mother Janet danced with my former art teacher. My college roommate engaged in animated conversation with Tyler's childhood neighbor. These connections across supposed social boundaries highlighted the artificiality of the divisions my parents had tried so desperately to maintain. As the evening progressed, more country club guests continued to arrive, many expressing delight at finding a celebration so different from what they had expected. Judge Harrington, one of my father's oldest associates, approached us with surprising warmth. I've attended 4 Montgomery weddings over the years, he confided, and I must say, this is the first one where the bride looks genuinely happy rather than perfectly appropriate. Well done. Alexander arrived midway through dinner, slipping in quietly and giving me a fierce hug. That was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen a Montgomery do, he whispered. And I'm insanely proud of you. When I asked about our parents, his expression grew complicated. They're processing. Dad wanted to leave immediately, save face, damage control, all that. But Mom insisted on staying at the club to handle the situation. They're both in shock that their foolproof control tactics failed so spectacularly. I had prepared myself for the possibility that my parents might never speak to me again after our deception. What I hadn't anticipated was how liberated I would feel, regardless of their reaction. The weight of seeking their approval had been so constant throughout my life that its absence felt like floating. Tyler and I were sharing cake with his workshop apprentices when Alexander appeared again, his expression tense. "Just got a text from Dad. They're on their way here." Apparently Mom insisted once most of the country club guests had left. "You might want to prepare yourself." My parents' arrival created a momentary ripple through the celebration. They stood in the warehouse entrance, looking simultaneously out of place in their formal attire and somehow diminished without their usual controlled environment. My father surveyed the transformed industrial space with obvious surprise, while my mother's eyes fixed on me across the room, her expression unreadable. Tyler squeezed my hand. "Together?" I nodded, and we crossed the room to meet them. The confrontation I had imagined so many times was finally here, playing out in the midst of our wedding reception rather than in private as I'd expected. My father spoke first, his surgeon's composure firmly in place despite the circumstances. "This was an extraordinarily public way to make your point, Jessica." "It wasn't about making a point," I replied evenly. "It was about having the wedding that actually represented us and our values." "You humiliated us in front of everyone we know," my mother interjected, her voice tight. "That wasn't our intention," Tyler said quietly. "We tried for months to compromise, to find middle ground that respected both family traditions and our own vision. Every attempt was dismissed or overridden." I guided them toward a quiet corner where we could speak more privately. "This wasn't about public embarrassment. It was about establishing that manipulation and control won't work anymore. We're starting our marriage on honest terms, and that's how our relationship with you needs to proceed as well." My father's expression remained hard, but something shifted in my mother's eyes as she looked around the space more carefully, noticing details she had initially missed, the elegant simplicity of the decorations, the obvious care in every handcrafted element, the genuine joy evident throughout the celebration. "You planned all this in secret," she said, not quite a question. "While pretending to accept our vision." "Yes," I acknowledged. "After you called our wedding an embarrassment to the Montgomery name, we realized no amount of compromise would ever be enough. You didn't want input into our wedding, you wanted complete control, with no regard for what would make us happy." For the first time in my memory, my mother seemed at a loss for words. My father attempted to reassert authority with a familiar tactic. "If this display of rebellion is finished, perhaps we can discuss how to move forward in a more reasonable manner." "That's exactly what we're doing," I replied, feeling Tyler's supportive presence beside me. "Moving forward means accepting that Tyler and I make our own decisions. We'll always listen to your perspective, but the final choices about our lives are ours." "And if we find that unacceptable?" my father challenged. "Then we'll have a very limited relationship," I said simply. "I love you both, but I won't sacrifice my happiness and authenticity for your approval anymore." The directness of this boundary clearly shocked them. For decades, the implicit understanding in our family had been that parental approval was the currency exchanged for love and belonging. Declaring this arrangement null and void represented a fundamental reconstruction of our relationship. My mother's composure cracked unexpectedly, tears welling in her eyes. "I only wanted what was best for you," she whispered. "I know you believe that," I acknowledged. "But best can't be defined solely by social standing or family tradition. It has to include what brings me genuine joy and fulfillment." We were interrupted by the arrival of Janet, Tyler's mother, who approached with surprising confidence given her previous intimidation around my parents. "William, Sophia," she greeted them with simple dignity. "Your daughter has married a good man who loves her completely. That's what matters in the end, isn't it?" Her straightforward question seemed to penetrate my father's defensive armor. He looked at Tyler with fresh consideration, then at me, really seeing my happiness perhaps for the first time. "The warehouse does look remarkable," he admitted reluctantly. "Not what I would have chosen, but I can see you've created something meaningful." It wasn't an apology or even a complete acceptance, but it was an acknowledgement, the first crack in a lifetime of rigid expectations. My mother, following his lead as she often did in uncertain situations, managed a watery smile. "Your dress is actually quite lovely," she offered. "Vintage?" "1930s silk with original beading," I confirmed. "I found it at that little boutique on Elm Street you always drive past." This tenuous connection, fragile as it was, created space for a subtle shift. My parents didn't stay long at the reception, but before leaving, my father awkwardly shook Tyler's hand while my mother surprised me with a brief, stiff hug. "We'll talk next week," she said, somewhere between a request and a directive. "I'd like that," I replied honestly. The weeks following our wedding brought careful, halting attempts at reconstructing our family relationship on new terms. My parents' initial anger gradually gave way to reluctant adaptation as they realized their traditional methods of control no longer worked. Our first post-wedding dinner together was painfully awkward, but by the third month, we had established a tentative new normal. Progress came in small moments, my father asking Tyler's opinion about a woodworking project rather than offering unsolicited career advice, my mother requesting a tour of my design studio with seemingly genuine interest, both parents adjusting to our firm no when they slipped into old patterns of overstepping. The most significant breakthrough came 6 months after the wedding, when my mother called to invite us to Sunday dinner with an unexpected addendum: "We thought we might invite Janet as well." I'd been meaning to get her recipe for that peach cobbler Tyler mentioned. This deliberate inclusion of Tyler's mother, treating her as an equal rather than an unfortunate necessity, signaled a fundamental shift in my parents' perspective. The dinner wasn't perfect, but watching my mother and Janet discover shared interests in gardening created a bridge I had once thought impossible. By our first anniversary, we had established a monthly tradition of Sunday dinners that alternated between homes, with both families participating on equal footing. My father gradually developed a grudging respect for Tyler's craftsmanship, especially after Tyler's custom furniture business received a feature in a national design magazine. "He's quite talented," my father admitted during one such dinner, examining a table Tyler had created. "The precision in these joints is remarkable. Almost surgical." Coming from my father, this comparison to his own profession represented the highest compliment he could offer. Tyler accepted it with characteristic grace, neither gloating nor appearing overly grateful for the validation. The true test of our reconstructed family dynamic came when Tyler and I announced my pregnancy at our anniversary dinner. In the past, my parents would have immediately taken charge, dictating everything from doctor selection to nursery design. Instead, after the initial excitement, my mother asked with careful restraint, "We'd love to help in any way you'd like. Just let us know what would be useful." This simple acknowledgement of our authority over our own lives, our right to set the terms of their involvement, confirmed that the painful wedding confrontation had achieved its purpose. The cycle of control that had dominated my relationship with my parents for 29 years had been broken, creating space for a healthier connection built on mutual respect rather than compliance. As I watched my mother and Janet immediately begin discussing handmade baby blankets while my father and Tyler debated the merits of different wood types for a crib, I reflected on our unconventional journey. Our wedding deception hadn't been about revenge after all, but about transformation, creating the crisis necessary to break entrenched patterns and build something new from the fragments. The supposedly embarrassing wedding had become the catalyst for healing that would extend to the next generation. Our child would know grandparents who respected boundaries and valued authenticity, breaking a cycle that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. That night, after everyone had left, Tyler and I sat on our apartment balcony looking at the city lights, my hand resting on my still flat stomach. "Do you think they would have ever changed without the wedding plan?" Tyler asked. "Probably not," I admitted. "They had no reason to. Their methods had always worked before." "Are you happy with how it all turned out?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm happy we stood up for ourselves and created the space for a healthier relationship. I'm happy our child will have a different experience than I did. And I'm beyond happy that I married you exactly the way we wanted, surrounded by authentic love instead of social obligation. Have you ever had to take a stand against family expectations to live authentically? What unexpected twists have you experienced in your own journey? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to create boundaries, even with the people who raised you. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful relationships can only emerge after the courage to break dysfunctional patterns. Your happiness is worth standing up for.